Any other questions? What did you find writing these questions? Give us your feedback. Difficulty getting the higher level, higher order thinking questions. What else? What else?
Making sure you keep it positive on the positive side.
Making it positive, exactly. Anyone else? You ready? You're up. Cool.
This is a little bit of a, perhaps a future or a thinking question, and this goes back to the slide that we have, that we had previously. So in conclusion, we're finishing a little early tonight, but perhaps we'll leave enough time open for some question and answers. One of the take-home points that we would like you to leave with is that many people think of the Board of Certification as a driver, and in some ways we try to stay up on best practices, particularly with exam writing. Putting the RD, we put a lot of time into our business and our functions, but really the drivers are you as educators. If you look at the blue slide that is up there, when we originally put the slide up, we asked the question, what does evidence-based practice look like in an environment right now? Because that's really what we are trying to describe, is what is here, and then that impacts, and I think, again, we go back to the question of this young man in the blue. I forget your name. Yes. Yes. So you ask the question. You know, when the BOC, the exam writers, are trying to decide what is on the exam, we have to look at what is happening in current practice. So when things significantly go away, and you have to, what is that point from practice, and what will it look like in 5 years? If we really want to influence it, it's influenced by our education competencies. And that's another point that we would like to make too, is that the competencies and the proficiencies don't stand separate from the RD or the practice analysis. They are two different documents for two different purposes, but they have to overlap. And actually the RD is a subset of the competencies and the proficiencies. If you had an opportunity to look at the competencies and proficiencies put out, recently released, the new ones, you'll see the crosswalk, and we have the same crosswalk that we do on the BOC website. So that is available to you if you want to look at how they come together. So when you're trying to look at your teaching strategies, but they aren't separate entirely. They're for two different purposes, but we do crosswalk those. But again, if we really want the changes in what a practice environment is going to look like in 5 years, we have to decide what those changes are going to be and then promote that through education. It's also influenced by professional development that we seek, because again, it's not just the practitioners that are entering, it's also the individuals who are currently practicing, and how do we help them move. So again, it comes back to the auspice of the role of educators and the importance that we all play in what we do. Now, the good thing is, if you looked back at, we're currently in the, we just moved to the 6th, but if you look at changes from the 5th to the 6th, you do see some representation of evidence-based practice that wasn't there previously. So we have seen a shift. It's not a major shift, but there is a shift. But if we want to see a big shift in the 7th, then we're going to have to see a big shift in how we currently practice and prepare individuals. And again, going back to that first line, working backwards, it's really the vision for the profession. I'm really anxious to hear what Marge is going to tell us about the vision quest and what athletic training will perhaps look like in 2025. Because if we have a common vision for what that looks like, we all know where to move. So we're not just all kind of scattered around. And again, educators, and then the influence of current practitioners. So with that said, again, we kind of moved through a little bit quicker. We didn't quite know how much time to give for people and how much you wanted to participate, but I think we kind of hit it right, even though we're a little early. But we can take some questions and answers if there are things we haven't resolved for you. Yes, ma'am.
Do I just focus in case. That's just my.
Do you want to talk about how it's narrowed? Yeah. I'm thinking about answering that in different ways. I agree with you. I don't think we teach to the test. I think we teach to the profession. So I will always encourage any educator to teach to the profession. I think those linchpins for me are the subject matter experts and looking at what is commonly referenced. That's how I approach it in practice. I do look at what's on the BOC reference list, and I know when I write my exams, I search for at least 2 different sources before I put a question on the exam in terms of what I am looking for. And I think, again, if it goes out there, if it actually makes it as a question onto the exam, we also have the period where it's tested, and that's our indicator. If it's something that is so new or doesn't seem very common, then your best test takers aren't going to do very well. So the question's not going to do well. So then we come back and debrief on it. So there's a lot more discussion to it. In some cases, it's helping students just have good test taking ability. You know, they may not recognize every question on the exam, but do they have enough skill to at least narrow it down to 2? And then a clinical decision making to say, okay, you know, what would an entry-level athletic trainer do in this situation to help them to do that? So that's my best response. Would you like to?
I would concur. You're not teaching for the exam, but there's obviously some things that are going to be utilized more often. Frequency, importance, criticality. And if you can keep that in your mindset, yeah, you might touch on a couple of these, but you would focus on the specific stress tests. And as Bernadette alluded to, when these questions go on, they are statistically meta-analysis reviewed, and if they're not performing well, they're brought back to either be revised or rejected.